The Vatican is a place where silence is not merely an absence of sound, but an integral part of its existence. It echoes through ancient stone walls, across grand, time-worn halls, and into the sacred chambers where decisions of the highest order are made. Silence here is woven into the fabric of the place, quiet as old as the church itself, steeped in rituals that have withstood the test of centuries. But on this day, this silence felt different. It wasn't the peaceful stillness of prayer, nor the respectful quiet that accompanies a ceremony. No, this was the kind of silence that settles just before something profound comes to an end. A silence that fills the space between breaths, heavy with the weight of finality, and leaves no room for words. Because words, in this moment, would make it all too real. The news had not yet spread, no bulletins had been issued, no reporters gathered outside the apostolic palace. But those few who had the privilege of being close to the Holy Father could feel the shift. They could see it in his breathing, shallower now, his gaze lingering not on objects, but on memories long past. His hands trembled, not just from illness, but from a soul that was preparing to let go. As the cardinals walked through the corridors, their red robes brushing against the cold marble floors, their hearts were heavy, not with the weight of tradition, but with the grief of knowing what was coming. It was not the office of the Pope they mourned, it was the man who had embodied that office with so much love and humility. A man who had touched countless lives, who had embraced the broken, spoken for the voiceless, and washed the feet of the forgotten. Pope Francis, the man who had redefined what it meant to lead with simplicity and compassion, was nearing the end of his journey. In his final days, there were no grand speeches, no carefully choreographed moments for the cameras. Those things had never mattered to him. What mattered most to him now, as he lay resting in a modest room not far from the Vatican gardens he loved so much, was the private, sacred truth of the moment. The bed he lay on was plain, unadorned, a simple wooden frame with no hint of luxury. Above him, the cross that hung on the wall was not golden, but carved from olive wood, rough, honest, much like the carpenter from Nazareth whom he had followed his whole life. Nurses checked in quietly, a sister from the Daughters of Charity who had cared for him for years holding his hand when pain crept in. But even she sensed it, there was something more, something unsaid that occupied his thoughts. A longing. A quiet desire he hadn't yet voiced. Outside, spring was stirring. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, the olive branches rustling as if heaven itself was exhaling over the eternal city. And beneath one of those trees, in his usual spot, lay Esteban. Not many in the Vatican knew his name, and fewer still knew his story. But Pope Francis remembered every detail. Esteban was no royal gift, no ceremonial mascot. He was a mutt, a street dog, scarred by hunger, trembling from cold. He had been found limping outside the Vatican walls years ago, with no collar, no chip, no reason to be noticed. But Pope Francis had seen him. One morning, as the Pope walked through the gardens in his usual quiet way, he spotted the dog hiding behind a bush, gnawing on a withered branch as though it were a bone. Without hesitation, Pope Francis knelt down, as he had for so many others, prisoners, children, the homeless, and extended his hand to the creature. The dog didn't move. It didn't growl. It simply stared, wide-eyed, tired, desperate. The Pope didn't force him to come closer. He whispered, softly, "You have not been forgotten," and left a piece of bread on the ground. The next morning, Esteban was there again. And the next. Over time, a fragile trust grew between them, not through commands, not through treats, but simply through presence. The Pope named him Esteban, from the Hebrew root meaning sorrow, but also steadfast. For Esteban had endured, and more than that, he had stayed. Their relationship was quiet, simple, and sacred. The Vatican guards had been instructed not to interfere. The gardeners left small bowls of water near the trees, and every day, the Pope would sit on the same bench, Esteban curling beneath his feet. No words were needed. No commands given. Just companionship. Just being. Many of the Pope's inner circle didn't fully understand the depth of this connection. Some thought Esteban was just a dog that lingered in the gardens. But to the Holy Father, Esteban was far more. He was a mirror, a living symbol of the kind of love that asks for nothing, demands nothing, but gives everything. In these final hours, as the Vatican held its collective breath, Pope Francis' thoughts turned once more to Esteban. He whispered a quiet request, barely audible to the sister by his side. "Bring him," he asked. She leaned in, confused. "Who, Your Holiness?" "Esteban. He will know. Tell them to let him in." It wasn't protocol. It wasn't the way things were done. But what was normal in the face of death? What was tradition if it stood in the way of love? The message went out quietly, and a young seminarian hurried to the gardens. But Esteban, as if summoned by a bond deeper than words, had already stirred. He rose from his slumber, sniffed the air, and without hesitation began walking. He passed the trees, the fountains, and made his way to the archway that led into the inner halls of the Apostolic Palace. The guards did not stop him. No one dared. Even silence, in its sacred stillness, knew when to give way for something more important. The doors of the Apostolic Palace rarely opened without permission, their heavy hinges creaking only for bishops, ambassadors, and dignitaries, people of great titles. But on this day, the doors opened for someone with no title, no nameplate, no robes, only a tail wagging with quiet urgency. Esteban padded softly into the hall, his paws echoing on the polished stone floors. He hesitated for just a moment at the threshold, unsure if he truly belonged. But then, as if a gentle breath whispered down the hall, he moved forward. The Vatican guards stood at attention but made no move to stop him. They understood this was no ordinary moment. This was love, walking into the highest court of the church. Esteban reached the papal apartments where Sister Cecilia waited. She had been told that Esteban might come, but she was not prepared for the surge of emotion that rose in her chest when she saw him, dusty, limping slightly, but with eyes sharp and searching. "He's waiting," she whispered, stepping aside. The room was dim, the curtains drawn, the air filled with the scent of old wood and oil. A crucifix hung above the bed, and beside it lay the Pope, frilier now, but still alert. When Esteban entered, the Pope stirred. His lips parted in a soft smile, a smile so deep, so gentle, it seemed to come from beyond pain. "There you are," he breathed. Esteban walked slowly, carefully, as if he understood the gravity of the moment. He came to the side of the bed, sat, and then lay down, just as he had always done under the olive tree, his head resting gently against the bed frame. The Pope reached down, his hand trembling but sure, and touched the dog's ear. For a moment, nothing else mattered, not the waiting cardinals, not the prayers, not the questions of succession. Only this. A man, dying. And the creature who had chosen to stay. Sister Cecilia stood in the corner, silent. She knew better than to interrupt. Some moments in life are sacred, and this was one of them. There are times when heaven doesn't bend low through miracles or flashing lights, but through love, quiet, unwavering love. And in that room, at that moment, love was present. Not in the form of a person or a grand gesture, but in the form of a dog who understood, without words, that this was the end. He knew it in the trembling hand that no longer sought the rosary, but instead sought the comfort of fur. He saw it in the gaze that no longer looked over nations, but simply wanted to say goodbye. One noticed the dog that lay in the shadows, quietly observing the proceedings. Esteban, the dog who had once been just a stray, now lingered in the corners of the Vatican with a presence that no one could deny. He was not a pet, not a creature who simply followed the rhythm of routine. He had become something more, a guardian, a keeper of memories, and a living testament to a bond that transcended the boundaries of life and death. As the cardinals deliberated in the Sistine Chapel, the weight of history pressing down upon their shoulders, Esteban remained outside, his eyes fixed on the door, unblinking, unwavering. He waited, as he always had. The flickering of candlelight from within the chapel cast soft shadows over his form, yet he did not stir. His presence, silent and steadfast, filled the space with an almost sacred energy. Those who saw him, whether they whispered or observed quietly from the sidelines, felt the gravity of his stillness. Some, unsure of his role, questioned who he belonged to. But others, especially among the older staff, had come to understand. One elderly janitor, who had long watched over the Vatican's halls, shared with quiet reverence, "He belongs to no one. He serves the Pope, and maybe that's the same thing." To those who had witnessed his quiet companionship with Pope Francis, it was clear Esteban wasn't just a dog. He was a symbol of the faithfulness that the Pope had so often spoken of the love that never asks for anything in return but simply gives. In the days that followed the Pope's passing, Esteban's role as the keeper of that sacred memory became more pronounced. He had not just witnessed the end of an era, he had lived through it, step by step, with the man who had redefined the papacy through humility and service. And now, as the world rushed forward, Esteban remained behind, his purpose unchanged, his devotion unwavering. Every morning, before the sun had risen, Esteban would walk the garden path that Pope Francis had once tread, his paws softly patting against the earth. He moved with purpose, as though retracing the steps of a man who had shown him the depths of compassion. There was no hurry in his movements, just the slow, deliberate rhythm of someone with a purpose deeper than mere instinct. He would pause in front of the roses, his gaze lingering as if recalling the moments he had shared with his master, the quiet conversations they never needed to have. And every night, Esteban would return to the same place, beneath the window of the Pope's old room, where he would lie in the shadow of the man who had given him a home, a purpose. His eyes would turn to the stars, as though searching for something, perhaps a sign that the connection they had shared would never truly end. His body may have been that of a dog, but his soul had been shaped by something far greater. A love that transcended time, that existed beyond the limitations of language, and that would continue long after the world had moved on. As the Vatican began to prepare for the election of a new pope, Esteban's presence continued to be felt. He was there, always in the background, always watching. The cardinals, wrapped in their ceremonial duties, occasionally glimpsed him, but he never interrupted. His purpose was not to draw attention, but to remind them of something they could not forget, the quiet, unwavering love that had defined the late Pope's life and work. His legacy was not written in speeches or in decrees, but in the lives he had touched, in the simple moments of compassion he had shared. In the chapel, beneath Michelangelo's grand fresco of the Last Judgment, the cardinals gathered to make decisions that would shape the future of the Church. The air was thick with the weight of their deliberations. But in the shadows, a small detail went unnoticed. Esteban, the dog, remained seated outside the doors, as if holding a space for the one who had once led them all. His role was not to speak, but to embody the love and faith that Pope Francis had instilled in those around him. The world would remember the election, the speeches, the decisions. But those who had been there would remember something else. They would remember the quiet moments, the sacred silences, and the dog who had stayed by the Pope's side until the very end. They would remember that, sometimes, the most profound acts of faith are not the ones that are loudest or most visible, but the ones that require no words at all. As Esteban continued to walk the halls of the Vatican, now without the Pope, he had become something of a living symbol, a reminder that holiness does not die. It changes shape. It shifts from one form to another, sometimes into silence, sometimes into smoke, and sometimes into a dog who refuses to leave the side of the one he had loved. And so, Esteban had become the keeper of keys, not the literal ones that opened doors to power or prestige, but the invisible ones that unlocked hearts and opened the way for love to endure beyond the grave. As the days turned into weeks, and the new pope took his place, Esteban remained a quiet sentinel in the Vatican's vast, ancient corridors. He would lie in the chapel, undisturbed by the comings and goings of the cardinals, his eyes soft but watchful. He knew that his purpose had not changed, that his journey was far from over. And every night, as the stars twinkled overhead, Esteban continued to wait, for the one who had once knelt to greet him, for the one who had shown him the true meaning of love. And perhaps, in the stillness of that waiting, he had already found a kind of peace that only a dog, who had given everything without asking for anything in return, could ever know. In the quiet chambers of the Vatican, something unusual happened, something profound. The doors had been sealed, as tradition dictated, denying the outside world entry. No reporters, no cameras, no outside contact. Yet, somehow, Esteban, the dog, had made his way inside before the locks could turn. No one saw him come, no one dared to remove him. He simply appeared, taking his place at the back of the room beneath a marble pillar, silent and unmoving. His presence was a reminder of something timeless, as the men gathered to choose the new pope. Amidst the tense deliberations, some glanced back at him, a few offering small smiles, others nodding in quiet recognition. One cardinal, visibly moved by the sight, later said, "It was as though the Pope had sent a messenger, not to vote, but to remind us of who we are truly meant to serve." As the days wore on and the ballots were cast, Esteban remained in place, unwavering. In between the weighty decisions and the quiet moments of reflection, his presence became a symbol of stillness, of service, and of loyalty. On the third day, when the chapel emptied for a brief recess, one of the last cardinals to leave, a man from Africa, slow but resolute in his faith, paused at the back of the room. He looked down at Esteban, who had not moved since the morning. "What are you still doing here, my friend?" the cardinal whispered. It was in that moment that Esteban stood, walked a few steps forward, and stopped beneath the image of Christ in judgment. The cardinal felt a chill, not of fear, but of something more profound, as though heaven itself had spoken, without words, through the dog's silent motion. When the votes resumed, the direction of the election shifted decisively, as though guided by the quiet presence in the room. And when the white smoke rose from the chimney, signaling the election of the new pope, the crowds erupted in joy and anticipation. Yet, within the chapel, Esteban did not stir. He stayed, gazing at the ceiling, as if listening for a voice he had known so well. Then, without a single glance back, he turned and left the room. No one stopped him. The Vatican guards stepped aside, not because they had been told to, but because they understood. The doors opened, not for him, but because of him. The world outside continued to move, but Esteban quietly made his way through the throngs of pilgrims and camera crews, unnoticed except by a little girl. She bent down to pet him, and when her mother tried to pull her away, the girl insisted, "He's looking for someone." "Who?" her mother asked, puzzled. "The one who used to walk beside him," the girl replied matter-of-factly. And with that, Esteban was gone, not in fear, not in flight, but with purpose. His mission had not ended. It had only changed. The days passed quietly in the Vatican, but something had shifted. It wasn't just the announcement of the new pope. It was the understanding, deep and silent, that the world had witnessed something more than the election of a leader. It had witnessed a transition of faith, of spirit, of love. Life in the Vatican gardens continued, as it always had, beneath the towering walls of the Apostolic Palace. But there was a space, tucked away among the olive trees and rose paths, where few had ever walked. This was a place where papal footsteps had long since faded, but the meaning of its silence remained. It was here, in this quiet sanctuary, where the bond between Pope Francis and Esteban had flourished, a bond that had transcended the titles of the Church, and had become something far more sacred: unconditional companionship. Esteban, the dog who had once been a stray, had wandered into the garden, wounded and without a collar, an unremarkable creature lost in the streets of Rome. But when Pope Francis saw him, he didn't turn him away. Instead, he knelt down, as he had for so many others, and whispered, "He knows pain. Let him stay." And stay he did. Esteban, the dog no one had known, became a constant companion to the Pope, sharing in his solitude and in his moments of quiet reflection. The garden, once a place of isolation for Pope Francis, had now become a sanctuary shared in silence with a dog who asked for nothing but presence. In those moments, as the sun set and the world moved on, Pope Francis would sit in the garden, writing, reflecting, praying, while Esteban lay beside him, his tail gently wagging, keeping rhythm with the Pope's thoughts. As the years passed, Esteban became more than just a companion. He became a symbol of purity, of love, of loyalty. His role was not to be a source of grand gestures or dramatic moments, but to simply be there, offering a quiet presence. For Pope Francis, the garden remained a refuge, a place where he could step outside the heavy responsibilities of his office and just be a man who could listen to the wind in the trees, who could speak to God in silence, and who could find peace in the company of a dog who asked nothing in return. But as the days wore on, Pope Francis grew frail, his strength fading. The vibrant man who had once stood tall before the world was now quietly slipping away. It was in these final days, as the world buzzed with preparations for a new papacy, that Pope Francis made his final request. It was simple, quiet, and deeply personal. "Bring Esteban." The Vatican fell silent, not the ceremonial silence of holy ground, but a deeper quiet, a mourning that only those who have loved deeply could understand. There was no grand speech, no final declaration. There was only love. Esteban came to the Pope's side one last time, his presence a reminder of a love that transcended titles, positions, and earthly power. The man and the dog, together one final time, in the garden where it had all begun. The room was still. The air was thick with unspoken understanding. Outside, the world continued to turn, unaware of the quiet, sacred moment unfolding inside the apostolic palace. Inside, the doctors, aides, cardinals, and staff moved around, but time seemed to slow. Pope Francis lay there, frail and fading, but his mind clear, focused. The faint sounds of the world outside, the distant chimes of bells, the hum of life in Vatican City, seemed almost irrelevant in this moment. The only thing that mattered was Esteban, lying by his side. The staff hesitated at first, unsure. They thought him delirious, a man nearing the end of his journey, lost in the haze of his final days. But when they looked into his eyes, they saw something deeper than mere reasoning, a clarity that spoke of a heart that knew exactly what it needed in this moment. The Pope repeated, in a voice barely a whisper, "Bring Esteban." And so, the aides scrambled to fulfill the request. The room was suspended in time as they did. The doctors stepped back, and the staff stood in awkward silence. The cardinals exchanged glances that spoke volumes. No one had ever seen Pope Francis like this, not as the Pope, not as the public figure who had led millions. No, in this moment, he was just a man nearing the end of his journey, seeking one final connection with the dog who had shared his most sacred moments. The protocol, the ceremony, none of it mattered. What mattered was honoring a simple, heartfelt request. The walls between the sacred and the ordinary were softened by the deep love between a man and his dog. And then, the unmistakable sound of paws padding down the hallway filled the air. Esteban was on his way. The guards tried to lead him, but Esteban didn't need guidance. He knew exactly where he was going. He had always known. His steps were slow but steady, as though guided by the rhythm of a heart he had followed for years. When he finally entered the room, his presence brought with it a profound peace. Pope Francis's eyes fluttered open at the sound of his dog's arrival. His hand, weak and trembling, reached out, and Esteban, ever faithful, moved closer, resting his head gently against the Pope's palm. In that moment, there were no words. There was only the quiet, unwavering presence of love. Esteban, the dog who had never asked for anything but to stay, remained by the Pope's side, honoring the final moments of a man who had lived his life in service to others. And as Pope Francis's life slipped away, Esteban remained, a silent witness to the end of a chapter, and the beginning of something eternal. The need for grandeur, for public recognition, for the acknowledgement of titles and status, the simple act of caring for a dog was a testament to the purity of Pope Francis's vision. It was a quiet but profound message, a reminder that love does not seek applause, nor does it need to be adorned with accolades. Love, in its truest form, is present in the quiet moments, in the small, unspoken acts that carry with them a deep, lasting significance. And so, Esteban, the dog who had been there for the Pope in ways that words could never describe, remained in the Vatican gardens, a silent symbol of a love that transcended human comprehension. In the days that followed, the Vatican became a place of reflection, not just for the life of Pope Francis but for the message he had left behind. As leaders, dignitaries, and the faithful gathered to mourn, Esteban wandered the gardens, his eyes solemn, his steps slow. The bustling of the world outside seemed distant, almost irrelevant. Esteban's presence in those gardens was a living testament to the life of a man who had chosen simplicity and humility over the trappings of power. He, too, had become part of the sacred history of the Vatican, a part of the larger narrative of faith, service, and love. Though the world mourned the passing of one of its most influential leaders, the message of Pope Francis endured, carried forward by the dog who had silently walked beside him through the years. Esteban had become more than just a dog, he had become an embodiment of Pope Francis's message. The bond they shared was not one of public spectacle or fanfare. It was a quiet, steadfast companionship that had carried them through the most sacred of moments, moments that now lingered in the hearts of those who had witnessed them. As the world moved on, Esteban remained, a quiet presence in the Vatican, a living reminder of the true power of love. There were no grand gestures, no public displays. But in his silence, Esteban spoke volumes. His unwavering loyalty, his unspoken companionship, his quiet strength, these were the true reflections of Pope Francis's legacy. And in those quiet moments, as Esteban wandered the same garden paths he had walked with the Pope, there was a deeper understanding in the air, a sense that love, when given without expectation or demand, has the power to shape the world in ways that no title or position could ever achieve. The Vatican staff, who had watched over the years as Esteban had quietly remained by the Pope's side, understood the depth of the connection between them. They honored the Pope's final request, choosing to care for Esteban in the very place that had been a sanctuary for both of them. In doing so, they ensured that this simple, humble dog would not return to the streets from which he had come but would remain in the sacred gardens, forever part of the Vatican's living history. For those who had seen Pope Francis's life unfold, this decision was not just a tribute to the dog but a reflection of the very heart of the Pope's mission. In a world often obsessed with titles and status, the Pope had shown that true love requires none of those things. It simply requires presence, being there when it matters most, offering comfort when words fail, and remaining steadfast even in the face of adversity. And so, Esteban remained, a living embodiment of those very principles, continuing to walk the paths where his master's footsteps had once been. The dog who had walked in the shadows, now became a symbol of the quiet strength that comes from unwavering love. As the days passed, Esteban's presence in the Vatican became even more poignant. He was no longer just the stray dog who had wandered into the gardens all those years ago. He had become an integral part of the Vatican's story, a symbol of the humility and simplicity that Pope Francis had cherished throughout his life. Esteban's loyalty, his quiet companionship, and his steadfast presence were now a legacy in their own right, a living memory of the Pope who had dedicated his life to serving others. People came to visit the Vatican, not only to pay respects to Pope Francis but to understand the deeper connection he had shared with Esteban. To many, the bond between the two was not just a simple friendship between man and dog, it was a reflection of a deeper truth about the nature of love and faith. It was a love that did not demand recognition, did not need to be acknowledged, but simply existed in the quiet moments when no one was watching. In the end, the legacy of Pope Francis was not defined by his speeches or public appearances, but by the simple, quiet acts of love he had shared with those around him, including Esteban, the dog who had stood faithfully by his side. As the Vatican staff moved through the halls, they often found themselves pausing to watch Esteban. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if he too understood the weight of the silence that had descended upon the city. And in those quiet moments, when no one else was around, Esteban would sit by the same marble pillars, beneath the olive trees, or by the garden's rose paths, carrying with him the silent memory of the man who had shown the world what it truly meant to love. And with every step he took, Esteban continued to embody the message of Pope Francis: love, humility, loyalty, and the quiet presence that remains long after the world moves on. In a world where the demand to constantly perform, to achieve, to be seen can often overshadow what truly matters, Esteban's quiet place in the Vatican became a profound reminder. Sometimes, the greatest acts of love are the ones that go unnoticed. Esteban, the dog, did not seek attention, nor did Pope Francis. They had simply lived together, loved each other, and shared moments of reflection, offering the world an unspoken yet powerful lesson: love doesn't need recognition, it simply needs to be. As Esteban wandered through the gardens of the Vatican, his presence grew more meaningful. He was no longer just a stray dog, he was a symbol of loyalty, faith, and unwavering devotion. Through every step he took, his life reflected the true meaning of companionship. His humble existence spoke volumes about what it means to love without expectation. The teachings of Pope Francis, which emphasized simplicity and humility, were embodied in this quiet creature who had given no thought to titles or status but instead to the deep bond he shared with the Pope. Esteban's place beneath the olive tree, where he had spent countless moments with Pope Francis, became more than just a spot in the garden. It became a symbol of the unspoken love and commitment that had transcended life, death, power, and position. While the world continued to spin outside the Vatican walls, inside, time seemed to slow down in honor of a bond so profound that it would endure for generations to come. The funeral of Pope Francis was a moment of immense significance, drawing world leaders, religious figures, and millions of faithful to pay their respects. The grand ceremonies were filled with reverence, and as the Pope's casket was lifted, something unexpected caught the attention of the crowd. At the edge of the platform, unnoticed by most, lay Esteban, the dog who had spent so many quiet moments at the Pope's side. No one had planned for him to be there. He wasn't part of the formal proceedings, nor was he a symbol for the cameras. Yet, in that moment, his presence spoke louder than any speech or tribute ever could. Esteban walked to the platform on his own, as though he understood the weight of the occasion. He took slow, measured steps toward the casket, his paws soft against the marble, and lay down once more, watching in stillness. His eyes, filled with sorrow, reflected a quiet understanding of the love and devotion that had marked his years with Pope Francis. The camera flashes captured the scene: Esteban, curled at the edge of the platform, symbolizing the deep, unspoken bond between the Pope and his faithful companion. It was a moment of pure love, loyalty, and faithfulness, qualities Pope Francis had lived by and that Esteban now embodied. Esteban, though not famous, became a symbol far greater than anything fame could offer. He became a reminder that true love doesn't need to be flashy or celebrated in grand ways. Sometimes, the most profound expressions of love are the quiet, steady acts that go unnoticed. Pope Francis understood this deeply, and through his relationship with Esteban, he showed the world that love does not require recognition. It simply requires presence. After the funeral procession and as the world outside moved on, Esteban remained at the Vatican. He didn't immediately leave the grounds. Instead, he stayed in the gardens, those gardens where he and Pope Francis had shared so many quiet moments together. For the staff and cardinals who had witnessed the bond between them, Esteban was more than just a dog. He was a confidant, a friend, and a source of comfort during the Pope's final days. Many came to the Vatican in the days that followed, not only to pay respects to Pope Francis but to honor Esteban as well. Pilgrims left candles, flowers, and handwritten notes near the garden fence, expressing gratitude for the love Esteban had shown the Pope in his final days. Some messages simply said, "Thank you, Esteban, for being with the Pope until the end." Others offered drawings of the Pope and his dog, peacefully sitting beneath the olive tree, where they had shared countless moments of reflection and peace. The Vatican, understanding the significance of this bond, released a simple yet profound statement to the world, acknowledging Esteban's place in Pope Francis's legacy. It read, "The Holy Father was accompanied in his final moments by his dog, Esteban. May we all love with such quiet loyalty." For the cardinals and staff who had witnessed the depth of their connection, this tribute was a fitting reflection of the Pope's values, a reminder that true love isn't about titles, power, or public recognition, but about humility, simplicity, and loyalty. As the years passed, Esteban's presence in the Vatican remained a quiet tribute to Pope Francis's teachings. He continued to wander the gardens, a living testament to the love that had defined the Pope's life. The staff who had cared for him in the Pope's final days made sure that Esteban had everything he needed while respecting his space. Esteban was not just a dog anymore, he was a part of the Vatican's living history. His continued presence was a reminder of the bond between the man and the dog, a bond that had transcended the ordinary and became something extraordinary. One day, a small bronze plaque was placed near the olive tree where Esteban and Pope Francis had shared so many peaceful moments. It simply read, "Here they Saturday." The plaque became a small memorial to the profound relationship between the Pope and his dog, two souls who had shared something deeply unspoken but eternally significant. Esteban's presence in the garden, where he had first met the Pope, had become a living symbol of love, devotion, and the quiet, unwavering bond they had shared. In the quiet stillness of the Vatican, Esteban continued to roam. His movements were slower now, more contemplative. The once stray dog who had wandered through the gardens had become a part of the legacy of Pope Francis. Though the world had moved on, Esteban's love and loyalty remained, a quiet, constant presence, offering a lesson in love that needs no words, no grand gestures. It simply needs to be. And as Esteban continued to rest beneath the olive tree, he reminded all who saw him that love, in its purest form, is unconditional, unspoken, and everlasting. Living symbol of those values, would remain forever entwined in the fabric of the Pope's story. His presence in the Vatican gardens became more than just a reminder of Pope Francis's life. It became a beacon for all who entered, offering a lesson in humility, love, and the unspoken bond that transcends all worldly achievements. As time moved on, the story of Esteban and Pope Francis took on a new life, becoming not just a story of mourning, but one of deep reflection and quiet inspiration. Visitors who had come to pay their respects to the Pope often found themselves drawn to the garden, where Esteban continued to roam. The silence of the gardens, now imbued with the weight of the Pope's passing, felt sacred, filled with the memory of those quiet moments shared between the man who had led the world and the dog who had faithfully walked beside him. People from across the globe came, not just to mourn the Pope's loss, but to honor the dog who had given everything without asking for anything in return. They left flowers, candles, and handwritten notes by the tree where Esteban had spent countless hours with his master. These tokens of gratitude were simple but powerful, much like the bond between Pope Francis and his dog. The world's collective grief found solace in the quiet presence of Esteban, who had been a constant, unwavering companion to the Pope until the very end. The Vatican, recognizing the significance of Esteban's role in Pope Francis's life, released a statement acknowledging the dog's place in the Pope's legacy. It was a short, humble tribute. The Holy Father was accompanied in his final moments by his dog, Esteban. May we all love with such quiet loyalty. This was not just a statement about the dog, but about what true love and devotion really mean, about the kind of love that doesn't seek the spotlight, that doesn't demand accolades, but instead, simply remains present. It was a love that endured, regardless of time, status, or even death itself. Esteban's place in the Vatican was more than just ceremonial. He had become part of the Church's living history, his quiet presence in the gardens a daily testament to the values Pope Francis had lived by. Esteban was no longer the stray dog who had wandered into the gardens years ago. He had become a symbol of the Pope's teachings on humility, love, and service. A living reminder that the most powerful love is often the simplest, most enduring kind, the kind that endures even after we're gone. For the staff at the Vatican, caring for Esteban was a way of honoring both the dog and the man who had formed such a profound connection. They ensured he was well cared for, allowing him the freedom to roam the gardens as he pleased, just as he had done when the Pope was still alive. There was no rush, no need for attention. Esteban's purpose was clear, simple, to remain in the space where he had once shared those quiet moments with Pope Francis. His presence became a tribute not only to the Pope's life but to the quiet moments of love that had shaped it. As the days passed, Esteban's life continued in the gardens, his grief mirrored in the stillness of the space he shared with Pope Francis. The quiet love he had shown, the loyalty he had provided, and the companionship he had given were now etched into the hearts of those who visited. And just as Esteban had always done for Pope Francis, he became a living testament to the enduring power of love in the lives of all who encountered him. The decision to let Esteban remain in the Vatican, cared for and loved by those who had witnessed his devotion, was a gesture that spoke volumes. It was a reminder that love doesn't need to be loud, doesn't need to be celebrated in grand ceremonies. Love, in its truest form, is about presence, about being there when it matters most, without asking for anything in return. The world may have moved on from Pope Francis's death, but in the heart of the Vatican, Esteban continued to embody that very love, the quiet, steadfast loyalty that the Pope had lived by. In the quiet corners of the Vatican gardens, Esteban remained, a symbol of everything Pope Francis had stood for. The olive tree where they had once shared so many moments of peace had become a place of reflection for those who came to pay tribute, not just to the Pope, but to the dog who had been there through it all. His presence, although quiet and unassuming, had become a beacon of love that transcended words, titles, and even death itself. And so, as time passed, Esteban's legacy continued to grow. He became a symbol of love, devotion, and the quiet companionship that had defined Pope Francis's life. He was a reminder that the most meaningful connections are often those that are formed in silence, in the unspoken moments of presence that carry the deepest truths. Esteban had never sought fame, but through his unwavering loyalty, he had become a living symbol of the love that had been the foundation of Pope Francis's ministry. And in the gardens of the Vatican, where the Pope's footsteps had once echoed, Esteban's presence would forever remain, a living memory of the Pope's legacy, one that reminded the world that love is not about recognition, but about the quiet, steadfast presence that endures through all things. Nature of love and devotion. The simple, quiet companionship they shared became a powerful reminder to the world of the beauty of unconditional love. As visitors gathered in the garden, many shared stories of their own pets, of the loyalty and love they had experienced in their relationships with animals. It was as though Esteban, through his silent mourning, had awakened something deep within the hearts of all who encountered him. The dog, who had been abandoned and forgotten, had transformed into a symbol of all the Pope's teachings, love without expectation, compassion for the marginalized, and the deep, unspoken connections that bind us all. As the months went by, Esteban's presence became less about grief and more about the enduring legacy of the love he shared with Pope Francis. His position in the Vatican gardens was no longer merely a reminder of loss, but a living testament to the profound simplicity that had defined the Pope's ministry. Esteban continued to rest beneath the olive tree, a place where Pope Francis had once sat, reflecting quietly, his presence steady and constant. Visitors who came to the Vatican sought out the olive tree, not just to remember the Pope but to witness the love between a man and his dog, a love that had endured through life, through death, and beyond. The Vatican, acknowledging the importance of Esteban's role in the Pope's legacy, took measures to ensure that his place in the gardens was respected and cared for. The decision to allow Esteban to remain in the Vatican, surrounded by those who had loved Pope Francis, was a profound statement about the enduring power of love. It was also a subtle reminder that love does not need to be recognized by the world, it simply needs to exist in the quiet moments between souls. The simple act of allowing Esteban to continue living in the same sacred space where he had shared so many moments with the Pope sent a message far beyond the Vatican's walls. It was a message that resonated with people across the world, reminding them that true love is often silent, patient, and unwavering. For those who had witnessed the bond between Pope Francis and Esteban, it became clear that the Pope's message of love, humility, and compassion was not just present in his grand speeches or diplomatic achievements but in the quiet, everyday moments he had shared with the dog who had faithfully walked beside him. Esteban, with his unassuming presence, had become a symbol of the Pope's teachings on unconditional love, loyalty, and the importance of being present for those we care about. In the quiet of the Vatican gardens, Esteban remained an enduring symbol of the Pope's legacy. His presence was a living reminder that love is not about titles or fame, it is about the relationships we nurture, the bonds we create, and the loyalty we show. Esteban's continued presence in the gardens, lying beneath the olive tree where the Pope had once sat, became a powerful example of the kind of love that transcends time and space, a love that endures beyond death itself. As time passed, Esteban's story continued to inspire people from all walks of life. The world had watched as the Pope's love for his dog had been publicly displayed in his final moments. Now, in the aftermath of his death, Esteban's presence reminded the world that love, in its purest form, is not bound by words or actions, but by the quiet, steadfast presence that is always there when we need it most. The bond between Pope Francis and Esteban became a universal message of love, loyalty, and faithfulness, transcending religious boundaries and touching the hearts of millions. The Vatican gardens, once a place of solitude for the Pope, had now become a place of reflection and remembrance for those who came to honor both the man and the dog who had shared such a profound connection. People from around the world visited, leaving flowers and notes beneath the olive tree, reflecting on the love that had been shared and the lessons it taught about the importance of being present, of showing loyalty, and of loving without expectation. Esteban had never sought fame or recognition, and yet, he had become a symbol of something much greater than himself. His quiet loyalty and devotion had spoken to the world in ways that no grand gesture or title ever could. As the months passed, people continued to visit the garden, drawn not just by the memory of Pope Francis but by the love that had endured through the bond between man and dog. Esteban had become a living testament to the most profound lesson the Pope had taught, that love, in its truest form, is not about seeking recognition or praise, but about simply being there for those we love, day after day, in moments of joy and sorrow. In the years that followed, Esteban's presence in the Vatican gardens remained a reminder of Pope Francis's legacy. The dog, who had once been a stray, had become a symbol of the Pope's love for all living beings, the forgotten, the marginalized, and the abandoned. Esteban's continued life in the gardens was a tribute not just to the Pope's final request but to the deep compassion and humility that had defined his life and ministry. The world had lost Pope Francis, but in the quiet presence of his dog, a living memory of the love they had shared, his legacy lived on. Esteban had shown the world that love is not always loud or grand, it is often quiet, steadfast, and enduring. And in that quiet, unspoken love, the world had witnessed the truest form of devotion, a devotion that transcends time, place, and even death itself. Esteban's place beneath the olive tree in the Vatican gardens became a sacred space, a symbol of the enduring power of love, a love that will continue to inspire and resonate with all who visit, long after the world has moved on. The story of Esteban, the humble dog who found his place by the side of Pope Francis, transcends the boundaries of fame, fortune, and recognition. His role in the aftermath of the Pope's death became much more than a quiet presence in the Vatican gardens. It became a profound reminder of what true love looks like. Esteban's journey, from a stray wandering the streets of Rome to becoming a symbol of the Pope's legacy, showed the world that love doesn't need grand gestures or public applause. It thrives in the quiet, unspoken moments, in the simple act of being there for someone, just as Esteban had done for Pope Francis in his final days. After Pope Francis's passing, many visitors flocked to the Vatican gardens, seeking solace and paying homage not only to the Pope's memory but also to the unbreakable bond between him and Esteban. There, under the olive tree where the Pope and Esteban had shared countless peaceful moments, people left flowers, candles, and notes, small but meaningful tributes. As they sat in silence by the tree, many realized that Esteban had become the embodiment of the Pope's teachings. His quiet presence was not just a reminder of the Pope's life, but also a living symbol of the humility, loyalty, and deep affection that defined the Pope's ministry. The bond between the Pope and Esteban had never been about public recognition or praise. It was not a relationship for the world to see but one built on mutual understanding and silent companionship. Their connection was a testament to the simplicity of true love, one that does not require validation from others but simply exists, steady and unwavering. Esteban had proven that love isn't measured by fame or titles, it's found in the loyalty and presence that persist, even when nothing else remains. For many, Esteban's role in the Pope's life had become the final lesson of his teachings. Love is powerful not because of what it demands, but because of what it offers, quietly and without expectation. The Vatican, honoring the Pope's final wish to have Esteban by his side in his last moments, made sure that the dog who had once wandered the streets of Rome would never be alone again. Esteban's place in the Vatican was secure. He would continue to live there, cared for by those who had worked with the Pope. This wasn't just a fulfillment of a final request, it was a reflection of Pope Francis's deeply held belief that all creatures, no matter their size or status, deserve love and respect. The Pope's compassion for the marginalized, the forgotten, and the abandoned had never been more apparent than in his care for Esteban. And now, as a symbol of this compassion, Esteban became a living reminder of the Pope's message: love knows no boundaries. In the years before his passing, Esteban had been a constant source of comfort for Pope Francis. The dog shared in the Pope's reflective moments, sitting quietly by his side as he prayed, wrote, or simply thought. Their relationship had been private, a sacred bond kept between the two of them. Pope Francis had often said that some things are meant to remain between souls, and in the case of Esteban, that was certainly true. The quiet companionship they shared wasn't about the world witnessing their connection, it was about the deep, wordless understanding between them. As people continued to visit the Vatican, they didn't just come to mourn the Pope's passing, they came to witness something far deeper. They came to reflect on the profound simplicity of Pope Francis's life and the quiet devotion that Esteban had embodied. The bond between man and dog became a symbol of the kind of love that transcends all human barriers, faith, status, or identity. It was a love that couldn't be measured by the world's standards, but was instead measured by the loyalty and affection shared between two souls. And so, as visitors sat by the olive tree, they weren't just remembering the Pope, they were also witnessing the living testament of his life's work, a symbol of humility, compassion, and love in its purest form. Esteban's legacy wasn't just about his connection to Pope Francis, it was about the message he imparted to the world. His continued presence in the Vatican gardens served as a reminder that true love isn't about seeking recognition or praise, it simply exists in quiet moments of devotion. Esteban had never sought the world's attention, but in his loyalty, in his silent mourning, and in his steadfast presence, he became the truest example of Pope Francis's life and teachings. And so, through Esteban, the world was reminded that love isn't defined by grand gestures, but by presence. It's the kind of love that remains even when everything else fades away. The Vatican, understanding the profound impact that Esteban had, decided to create a permanent sanctuary within the gardens dedicated to animal welfare, particularly for stray animals. This act was more than charity. It was a reflection of Pope Francis's lifelong commitment to compassion for all living beings. The creation of this sanctuary was a fitting tribute to the Pope's belief that love extends beyond human relationships to all of creation. It wasn't just about caring for one creature, it was a living testament to the Pope's philosophy that love and compassion should transcend every boundary. As Esteban continued to rest beneath the olive tree, people began to gather there, not just to mourn but to reflect. The space where the Pope and Esteban had shared their quiet moments became a place of solace for those seeking a deeper connection to the Pope's message. It was in that serene garden, with Esteban's gentle presence, that many found a quiet, healing energy that seemed to radiate from the space. It reminded them that true compassion isn't about loud proclamations or grand gestures, it's about the quiet, unwavering care we offer to others, whether human or animal. Through Esteban, the world saw that love doesn't need to be shouted from rooftops. Sometimes, the most profound acts of love are those that go unnoticed, those that live quietly in the background but leave an indelible mark on the world. Esteban's journey, from a stray dog to a symbol of the Pope's compassion, was a testament to the power of love to heal, to transform, and to bring light into the darkest places. His legacy, like the Pope's, would continue to resonate for years to come. The memory of their bond, the simplicity of their love, would remain a constant reminder to all who visited the Vatican that love, in its purest form, is the most enduring legacy we can leave behind. As the years passed, the story of Pope Francis and Esteban became more than just a memory, it became a lesson for generations to come. A lesson about the power of love, loyalty, and humility. A lesson about the quiet moments that define our lives, the bonds that exist between us, and the love that remains even when everything else fades. In the quiet corners of the Vatican, where the air always seemed to hum with an ancient rhythm, one particular presence stood out: Esteban. A dog with no title, no fame, and no accolades to his name, yet a creature whose bond with Pope Francis became a universal symbol of love and loyalty that transcended every boundary. The Pope's relationship with Esteban, his faithful companion, wasn't one marked by grand speeches or public adoration. It was, instead, a simple, profound connection rooted in quiet understanding, in mutual respect, and in the shared silence of their moments together. Esteban's role as the Pope's companion transformed over time, evolving into something far more symbolic than anyone could have predicted. As the years passed, the dog who had once been lost and abandoned in the streets of Rome had become an emblem of Pope Francis's teachings. The love they shared was not the loud, attention-seeking kind that the world often celebrates. It was love in its purest, simplest form. The kind that asks for nothing, expects nothing, yet gives everything. It was a love that existed not to be seen, but to be felt. In the wake of the Pope's passing, Esteban's presence became even more significant. The bond between them was not only a reflection of the Pope's values, but also of the unspoken truth that true love doesn't require recognition. As visitors came to the Vatican, some seeking solace, others hoping to honor the Pope's memory, they found themselves drawn not just to the man who had led millions, but to the dog who had been with him in some of his most reflective moments. They left flowers, candles, and notes, simple tributes that expressed gratitude for the Pope's life and the love that had flowed from him to others, especially to the dog who had shared his days. As Esteban aged, Those who had witnessed his quiet companionship with Pope Francis noticed the physical signs of time passing. His once energetic steps became slower, his once lustrous coat showed the marks of age, and he sought the comfort of the Pope more than ever. But despite the slow decline of his body, Esteban's spirit remained unbroken, his love undiminished. He remained a steady presence in the gardens, a living testament to the humility and devotion that had marked the Pope's own journey. Pope Francis, ever attuned to the suffering of others, recognized that Esteban's health was fading. Quietly, without fanfare, the decision was made that Esteban would not be left alone when the time came. The Pope, a man who had dedicated his life to caring for others, ensured that his beloved dog would pass in peace, surrounded by the same love that had defined their relationship. In the final days of Esteban's life, the Vatican staff, priests, and even visitors who had known him for years came to say their goodbyes, gentle, respectful tributes to a companion who had become family. When Esteban finally passed away, Pope Francis, though heartbroken, understood that this was part of life's natural circle. The love that he and Esteban shared had transcended death itself. It was a love that had been lived out daily, quietly, and without expectation, just as the Pope had taught. Esteban's passing only solidified the Pope's message: love is unconditional, it is given freely, and it endures through all things, even beyond death. The world mourned the loss of the Pope's beloved companion, but the lessons Esteban had imparted were just beginning to echo across the globe. The Vatican held a simple but moving memorial for Esteban in the gardens, where he had spent so many quiet moments with the Pope. Pope Francis, in a rare moment of solitude, stood near the grave of his dog, reflecting on the many lessons Esteban had taught him, lessons about trust, vulnerability, and the true meaning of love. Pope Francis had always taught that love isn't about titles, wealth, or power. It's about how we treat those who cannot repay us, how we care for those who are often overlooked. Esteban had embodied this lesson in the most profound way. As the world continued to reflect on the Pope's teachings, the legacy of Esteban remained a constant reminder of what Pope Francis had always preached: love is not about recognition. It's about being present for one another, even in silence. It's about the quiet, selfless acts of devotion that form the bedrock of true relationships. Esteban had given the world this lesson, without ever speaking a word. In the years after Esteban's death, the Vatican honored his legacy in a way that spoke volumes. A permanent memorial was created for him, not just as a beloved pet, but as a symbol of God's love and the grace found in the simplest, most unassuming relationships. The memorial, nestled among the flowers and trees Esteban had once roamed, became a place of reflection. Visitors who came to pay their respects were not just honoring the Pope's legacy, but Esteban's as well. The simple, quiet love between man and dog had left an indelible mark on their hearts, reminding them that love does not need to be loud to be lasting. As Pope Francis continued to visit the memorial, there was a profound sense of peace in his visits. He knew that Esteban was at rest, free from the aches of old age, but he also knew that the dog's legacy was far from over. Esteban had taught the Pope, and the world, something that could never be taken away: true love does not seek recognition. It simply exists, quietly and faithfully, enduring through all things. And so, in the gardens of the Vatican, Esteban's spirit lingered, not in grief, but as a quiet whisper of love that never truly fades. Through Esteban's life, Pope Francis had shown the world that love is not just a lofty ideal, it is an action, a way of living that requires humility, compassion, and presence. Esteban had been the quiet companion to a man who had dedicated his life to serving others. And through that companionship, he had imparted a simple yet profound message: love is a gift, one that asks for nothing in return but gives everything. The legacy of Pope Francis was no longer just in his words and deeds, but in the enduring love between him and his dog, two beings who, through their shared silence, had taught the world the true meaning of devotion. In the peaceful, hallowed grounds of the Vatican, there lived a humble creature, a dog named Esteban. His story, intertwined with that of Pope Francis, became a tale not just of companionship, but of profound, quiet love that transcended the ordinary boundaries of life. Pope Francis, renowned for his teachings on humility and love, often spoke of the lessons he had learned from Esteban, lessons that extended beyond words and deep into the hearts of people around the world. As Esteban grew older, his role in the Vatican shifted. No longer just the Pope's companion, Esteban became a symbol of the kind of love that Christ himself had shown during his time on earth, a love that asked for nothing and gave everything. With each passing year, Pope Francis became more vocal about the dog's role in his life, frequently sharing stories in his weekly audiences. These stories were not just about a pet, but about the living embodiment of unconditional love, a love that didn't demand anything in return but gave endlessly, without expectation. Pope Francis used Esteban's life as a parable, reminding his audience that all living creatures, human or animal, deserve respect and care. He referred often to the Gospel of Matthew, which speaks of God's care for the smallest of creatures, comparing it to the love and respect that should be extended to all of creation. Through these reflections, Esteban's legacy began to grow, echoing across the globe. It became a reminder that love knows no boundaries, whether human or animal, whether big or small. It was a call to be compassionate in all things. As more people heard the story of Esteban, it ignited a global movement. Communities began to create their own memorials, not just to honor animals, but as reflections of love and kindness for all living creatures. Esteban, a simple stray dog who had wandered the streets of Rome, had become the face of a new, profound understanding of love, a love that went beyond the grandiose and deep into the quiet, everyday acts of kindness. The memorial to Esteban in the Vatican Gardens became a pilgrimage site, drawing visitors from all walks of life, cultures, and faiths. They came not only to honor the Pope's legacy but also to connect with a message about the heart of God's creation, the message that love is the greatest gift we can offer, that every creature, regardless of status or power, deserves care and respect. Pope Francis would often stand by the memorial, feeling an immense peace wash over him, reflecting on the dog's legacy of love, humility, and simplicity. But Esteban's life was not just about the final moments of companionship with the Pope, it was about every small, shared experience. The dog had become a part of the fabric of Vatican life. He had been a constant presence, a quiet witness to the Pope's spiritual journey. Their bond was one of simplicity and trust, a quiet reflection of the love that the Pope had always advocated in his teachings. In the stillness of their time together, Esteban had shown Pope Francis that love was not about making noise, but about being present in each moment, no matter how small. As the inevitable march of time took its toll, Esteban, now an older dog, began to slow down. His joints ached, his steps grew more measured, and his once glorious coat began to fade. The staff at the Vatican, who had watched Esteban grow with the Pope over the years, recognized the signs. But even as his body weakened, his spirit remained strong, and his bond with Pope Francis remained unbroken. Together, they spent countless peaceful afternoons in the garden, the sanctuary that had once been a place of quiet reflection for both. When the end finally came, the Pope, ever compassionate, made sure Esteban was surrounded by love in his final days. Just as Pope Francis had given so much of himself to others throughout his life, he now ensured that his beloved companion would not face his final journey alone. Esteban passed quietly, surrounded by the love and care that he had always known. Pope Francis, though deeply saddened, understood that death was simply a part of life's cycle. He saw in Esteban's passing the ultimate demonstration of love that transcends death, the love that God himself offers. Esteban's memorial became a quiet tribute, not just to a beloved dog, but to the profound teachings about love that he had imparted. The Pope's message in the days following Esteban's passing was clear and simple: true love is not bound by words or grand gestures. It is the love we offer when no one is looking, when no one expects anything in return, just like Esteban's loyalty to the Pope. Through his life, The dog had taught the world about the power of unconditional love, about the importance of being present for one another, and about finding joy in the smallest moments. In a rare and quiet moment, Pope Francis stood beside Esteban's grave, deeply moved by the dog's legacy. As he whispered a prayer for Esteban's soul, he realized that the love they shared was eternal. It would live on in the hearts of all those who had witnessed their bond. Esteban had been more than just a pet. He had been a teacher, a living embodiment of Christ's love, a reminder that love doesn't require recognition, only presence. In the years that followed, Pope Francis continued his work with renewed vigor. The passing of Esteban had not diminished his dedication to his mission. If anything, it had deepened it, as the Pope became even more determined to spread the message of compassion and love. The world needed it now more than ever. But no matter how busy he became, Pope Francis always carried a quiet sadness within him, a sadness for the dog who had been his constant companion. In the solitude of his private chapel, the Pope found himself reflecting often on Esteban's life and the lessons he had taught him. He realized that Esteban's journey hadn't ended with his death, it had simply evolved. In life and in death, Esteban had shown him that love transcends everything, including death. And as he prayed, Pope Francis felt Esteban's spirit beside him, urging him to continue the work they had started together. Esteban's life was a story of transformation, not just for the dog, but for the Pope and for the world. His love had been simple, pure, and unconditional, and it was this love that became the greatest legacy of all. The quiet bond they shared had left an indelible mark on the hearts of millions, and through that bond, the world was reminded that true love is always present, sometimes in the simplest, most unassuming places. Esteban had never sought fame, but in his humble loyalty, he had taught the world more about love than anyone could have imagined. His legacy, woven into the very fabric of the Vatican, would continue to inspire generations to come, reminding them that love, in its truest form, does not need to be shouted, it simply needs to be shared.